Crazy big question.
Oh boy.
I mean, if we're going deep on this, I would like to preface this entire conversation with, I mean, these are unanswerable, super hard questions. I mean, consciousness is a whole other issue because, I mean, we really don't understand that. Like, could a deep enough neural net somehow give rise to like a self-reflective thing?
Because that's the whole thing. What is consciousness? I'm not a philosopher, so I don't really have like the long-winded like view of what it is. So when it comes to tech, I hope I never have to personally see it. Failure is actually a very important thing. You can fail a million times, but the one thing that you do might be exactly what you need. Keep asking, keep reading, keep learning, but you might not always get the answer, and that is okay.
In trying to understand yourself and the world around us, we're trying to kind of like expand the domain of like known territory. If we know the room we're in, I think we sleep much more soundly at night. But it's almost like it's an infinite room, and then just like infinitely many doors leading off into different directions. Awesome. I'm gonna start recording now. Clifton, thank you so much for coming on Max Depth. Much appreciated. Maybe you want to just give a little background of who you are, where you work, what mission you have, and maybe we can then transition to some of the projects you're working on and some of the research in deep learning that you find particularly fascinating these days.
Sounds good. Well, first, thanks for having me on, Max. Very excited to be here. You and I have similar backgrounds. We both come from Martha's Vineyard. But I am a fourth-year PhD student at Northeastern University in the cybersecurity program, and I work majority on networks and network security.
Awesome. And then do you want to maybe transition to either projects or some research you found particularly interesting? Anything, because I know you have a strict code of what you're allowed to speak about, but anything you can give me, I would be greatly appreciative of.
Of course. So a big thing in tech is cybersecurity is not a new thing, but it's a growing area. It's something that we don't really have a full definition on. We know what it takes place on the internet, trying to secure it and making sure it's the safest place for people to work and learn. But there's so many broad areas of it, and it fits under so many umbrellas, where I have focused more on the network security aspect of it. So communication, like phone conversation, Wi-Fi conversation, and a big buzzword, as I'm sure we'll talk about later, is deep learning. We are starting to implement more deep learning methods into networks, which is working on securing different communication channels, as well as detecting any type of attack that can happen from it. It's a lot of touch and go. It's interesting for sure. But the biggest issue with it is, like you said, talking about like current research that you like, you're in some senses kind of creating the research that is laying the groundwork for some of this stuff, where there's tons of papers over the last 30 years of network security, in the past decade of machine learning and deep learning. But now you have to kind of work on combining them to work in the sense together, as well as actually being implementable on a network, which is something that isn't always possible at the moment. Recently, I mean, there's been a ton of cool stuff, people creating new forms of networking that might work in countries that restrict web flow. So there are ways that people are actually able to like sneak in kind of like communication channels that kind of get around different countries' restrictions, which has been a pretty interesting thing that came out a couple of years ago.
Is blockchain the underlying structure that allows those processes in the countries that have restrictive, I guess, like restrictive information flow? Is that the technology that's enabling that to be possible?
Not in the paper I'm thinking of. The paper I'm thinking of was something that actually just utilized a certain way of actually sending information.
How is information set then?
As you know, like when you see like your phone, you type your message and you send it to someone, while it looks to you like you're sending a text message, usually what happens is it gets converted into just bits. So the zeros and ones, the bytes, zeros and ones and gets sent over the internet. In the case of Wi-Fi, it's literally sent through the air between different reference points until it reaches your location. And then from there, depending on encryption schemes, stuff like that, it is then decoded and sent back and forth, as people know with iPhones, like with iMessage, almost instantaneously, where you can send messages back and forth with barely a 1 second delay. That's the thing in countries where it's blocked, where internet is highly restricted. Countries have access to devices that can fully just kind of cut the bandwidth, so it barely allows any data flow over an internet, over a wireless medium, over anything with wires, and they can just completely slow it down, not technically to zero with some of the new technology that's out, but also being able to just restrict it so they can also monitor what's happening. And that's where, I mean, I'm guessing we'll talk a little bit about the issues of tech and kind of how it works in everyday life. But a lot of these countries, even though they try to ban or severely limit, they're also trying to observe what is being sent as well.
How cool. Would you mind going into some of that now? I have no patience, please.
Yeah, so that's the thing. The internet is this very beautiful and terrifying thing. This piece of technology that has pushed the world forward in so many ways, but also held us back because of the scariness, I think is the best word for it, because you're using this thing that the world is at your fingertips, literally. You can talk to people in a different country in an instant. There is no longer this whole issue of not being connected to someone. Mm-hmm. However, and we're seeing this a lot recently, the emergence of social media has kind of put the information out there. We see how all this information can be tracked, can be harvested, can be sold, and everyone knows about your everyday life. These big corporations and companies can literally sell you something that you might want based on what you're already doing. Governments can also do that by harvesting your data and also figuring out, they can, in some cases, figure out if you might be a threat, if you can maybe be someone that would be on radar for someone, which is also a dangerous thing when you open up the concept of what the internet is.
Yeah, I would love to touch more on that word "scary" and why you use that, because I've had an ongoing debate with actually a computer science friend at Northeastern about this topic of like privacy and big data and personal user data, and I've talked to some people about it before, and the problem is her argument is that if you're not doing anything, like in the case of governments, for instance, if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about. Like what's the big deal? And my argument is kind of like lackluster. I don't really have a great argument in retaliation to that. Like it's almost like an intrinsic, I feel like almost like a very human thing to want to have like privacy is just like a human, you hear privacy as a human right, but like I almost like, why? Like if you're getting like for me, like tennis racket ads instead of like, I don't know, like diesel fuel for a truck or something, like something that I wouldn't want. Why is that such a bad thing? If it's if my phone is going to suggest that the Uber to take me to the club that I want to go to tonight without even pulling up my phone, why is that such a big deal? So maybe we could maybe you could answer that in light of the word "scary." Yeah,
I mean, it's an interesting thing to think of because it's this inherently both good and evil. And there's this whole question of what is the internet to someone, where as researchers, we can look at it as, and we can find the horrors. It's very easy to find the issues in something, and that is true. But it's also easy to find the good things. Like you said, you're given this ease of access to something, but you're also, while you are getting this ease of where the Uber is going to take you, what maybe sports equipment you want, yes, you are getting the ease of maybe your day-to-day life, but the question down the line is at what expense?
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is a very interesting thing, because people, and it makes sense, you want to live in the present, in the now. What happens 10, 20 years down the line when there is this terabyte of data on you that can tell you your entire life? It knows your birthday, it has pictures of you, it can figure out what your
Location
face is,
data,
location data, all these things, your Facebook posts, your tweets, all these
everything.
things. It knows everything about you. And can that be used for good? Absolutely. But if this data is open to everyone, or it's open to people that care more about profit over the human experience, then we're starting to move into what can they use with this data to potentially harm you, to maybe what if medical records are on there? Oh, you Googled, I have headaches like this. Can that then affect you with other things? And we're getting into this weird thing of how much data is too much data. And like you said, there are certain things where people are like, oh, it's easy, it's harmless. But what happens when it does cross that line?
Mm-hmm.
What happens when it does become more malicious? What happens when when your data is being sold for something and you're not actually seeing the profit from yourself, but people are profiting off of you?
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually a growing debate. And we're starting to see different laws implemented for this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be one of the things. One of the things that like I would definitely be on that side with, like ownership over your own data, but not like from the perspective of so other people can't just like make a profit off of you. Um, Less than like, because I mean, I feel like the negatives are like predicated on there being like a malicious actor like going after you, and like I guess, and like that could totally be the case, and maybe in like certain countries, like with more nefarious governments, that would be a bigger problem. But I guess I just don't see that. Maybe I'm just living in the short term, in the present too much, and I'm not seeing the big picture, like how things can eventually change. Because I hear like, oh yeah, the negative consequences down the road, but and maybe it's because we just don't know. Maybe it's because like we just don't understand like how the data can be used. So it kind of feels like someone's kind of just painting like a smoke screen with nothing really behind it.
That's a good point, because what if you're just throwing this like scary giant monster at the wall? You're just throwing it there and hoping it scares people to make a change, or maybe make people hesitant to it. However, in studying cybersecurity, you know that if you have a model that doesn't account for adversaries, for any type of attack or malicious user, then it's not a resilient type of system. And that's a very common buzzword today, resilience. It's not always the best word to throw around, but that's kind of what happens to it, where data is you. We're getting to the point where data is yourself. You are defined by what your internet image is. How do you want to define that? I am someone, I do not post on Facebook. I have a Facebook. I look and I browse, I scroll, but I do not interact, I do not touch, I rarely post. So I know at the moment, Facebook doesn't, like maybe from like 10 years ago, they might know who I was in high school, in middle school, but that's not the same as what I do in my day-to-day life. It's up, if people want to put their life out on the internet, that's completely fine, but they have to know there might be a risk being posed to that. And how much of a risk do they care that their data is being sold to different companies, to marketing people? Is that fine with people? And some people are fine with that. They don't care, and that's completely fine. But like you said, privacy is something that's like supposed to be this like inherent right, this human right to privacy. We have a right to privacy in the Constitution, and in a sense, you're given that privacy when you're in your own house. When you're in a private place that you believe is private, and you think that a normal person would also deem it private as well. We haven't really deemed what that is on the internet. That's something where if you're a public Twitter account and you post your tweet, that's not private. But what if you're a private account? What if you're this? And that's starting to become, we can talk about data privacy for all the time, but what about what you expect to be private on the internet? And a lot of people will just say, if you're on the internet, nothing should be private. Like your privacy is, like you're giving up the right to that. But that's when we're starting to get into this interesting question that needs to be set either by the courts, by the law, or whatever method it needs to follow.
Okay, crazy big question. If you were holding the magic regulatory wand, what's your spell? What's your move?
Oh boy. If I was personally, there should be some form of privacy. People should be given a right to some form of privacy. It might not be what post, but it should be similar. That there are a couple regulatory things. Europe has the Gdpr, which is based around general protection of privacy and data, where you should be given the right to your data. Sure, these companies can harvest it. Sure, they can hold on to it if they need it for cookies and stuff like that. But you should have some semblance of saying, I don't want my privacy, so I don't want my data sold. I don't want this being sent out. I want my data to just stay with me, and you can deal with the repercussions, but you cannot sell this to someone else. There's only so far we can go because there's only so much privacy we can actually implement on the web.
Okay, going back a few points at the beginning, you're talking about different types of attacks. Could you maybe highlight maybe in like network security specifically, or broader if you want to branch out? Like really, the only type of attacks like that I've ever heard about is like North Korea hacking into Sony, and in retaliation of the Interview movie, or maybe like emails getting leaked or something like that. But maybe you could provide a more nuanced perspective on the different types of attacks and ones that you think are most important to guard against.
Oh yeah, so there are plenty. I'll start with the most common one that we see roughly nowadays, and I'm sure this one will hit a little close to home for us. They're called Ddos attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, where actually there's two good ones. So a DDoS attack is very common. It is when an adversary hijacks or kind of uses a bunch of separate IP addresses or a bunch of different sources and just floods a website with too much information. When that happens, it overloads a server and it takes down the entire server. It happens both maliciously and accidentally. It's always really funny. Almost every year, when it's Amazon Prime Day, Amazon usually accidentally DDoSes itself because it doesn't allocate enough resources for the amount of people shopping on the website. But these are also very easy to create. This is one of the easiest attacks to create, and it's a very hard one to kind of go against, because a regular DOS attack, which is just a regular denial of service, is usually a single entity sending a bunch of stuff. If you're an IT person, you can just block it. Oh, this person's sending too much, I block your IP. That's done. But when it's distributed, there might be 10,000 separate IP addresses flooding your servers. Very hard to, there's ways to do it. We're starting to get there, but it's still a pain. The funny one of the most funny and awful attacks are called phishing scams, or spear phishing. Yes, PH. And these ones completely attack human error. So in cybersecurity, we can talk all about how this is a problem, XYZ. When it all boils down to it, the biggest danger to a security system, anything online, is human error. Phishing and spear phishing attacks usually happen when someone sends an email and says, hey, so-and-so, make sure to click this. Someone will click it, it downloads something that usually downloads ransomware. Ransomware will open on a system, get into a server, and encrypt everything on a server. It's like a very hilariously awful thing. So everything on a system gets encrypted.
It's like the archetypal cyber attack.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going. Sorry.
So it'll absolutely just lock everything. Every file is encrypted, and the only person with the encryption key is the attacker that sent the first email.
Mm-hmm.
This happened several months ago to the Steamship Authority, the boats that get between Martha's Vineyard and Cape Cod, and it absolutely destroyed the system. And it took them like a week to get back up. And there were still issues after that. When it goes phishing into ransomware, you have to decide if you pay the hack. They just almost every time, I believe, they actually just send you. Usually they're very like good faith adversaries where they send you the key once they get their money, usually in Bitcoin because it can be untraceable. Sometimes they don't, and then you have to redo your whole system and you potentially lose all the files that have been encrypted. This has also happened in a different way. So there's that ransomware that completely just ruins the system. And those are really easy. 60 Minutes actually did a really interesting bit on this a couple of years ago, where it literally showed you could just go online. Someone will make you a ransomware attack, and they will give you it as long as they get a certain percent of the ransom is paid.
Wow,
So
yeah.
they're very easily obtainable.
Okay.
The other thing that can come, well, spear phishing can also steal data, can steal social security numbers, steal something from an individual person. But the worst cyber attack, I would probably say, in recent history, is the SolarWinds hack, which happened several months. It started right in the transition between presidencies, where we found out that a Russian hacking group, so a non-affiliated government hacking group, was able to infiltrate through Microsoft, or through several exploits, almost the entire government of the United States, just kind of sitting there harvesting data for what actually seems like it was probably months. I haven't seen an update on it. I don't think I've looked recently, but it compromised so many things. And it was this hidden phishing attack that was downloaded and exploited something that put a lot of people at risk, a lot of data at risk, as well as embarrassing the entire US government, which was a very crazy thing.
Wow.
That's a fun one. That's something that you look at and you're like, how did they figure this out? Because it broke through something with Microsoft. It had a couple other things, and it was all from this company called SolarWinds that distributes the government applications to everyone.
And do we know if they got what they wanted?
I think they never. I don't remember if they said what it was, but there was a lot of data that was stolen or extracted is also the word.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a very crazy thing when it broke.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can imagine. That's crazy. I mean, this is just like dumb question, but like when they're going in there, like what data do you think, and maybe like we're not the people that should be having this conversation, but what are they trying to get? What are they looking for? Is it emails that could incriminate politician? Is it I don't know what it would be.
I mean, if you're going, so I think the way to think of it, like SolarWinds provided applications to so many levels. I believe they even send applications up to the Treasury, so they can get money information, potentially put people that might be undercover or like not hidden or like spies, like potentially at risk with names that might be leaked. There are just so many things you can do when you look to attack the government.
Mm-hmm.
In theory, a government should have a strong enough cyber system to not even warrant a type of attack. Mm-hmm. Obviously, this group got bold and they succeeded, but when you start to break into something that has so many reaches across the government, really, it's kind of really just what do you want? It's how it looks.
Wow, that's crazy. One of the things that I had heard about, if we're on the topic of Russian hacking and infiltration, was that I found particularly interesting. I don't know how, and I don't know if this really has so much to do with security, because I can't think of a way that like we would guard against it. Would be like creating like fake accounts and stirring up, I guess you could call it intense discourse on social media, or like plan like I heard one, I don't know if it's true, this is planning like a LGBTQ rights rally right next to a white Lives Matter, so, or like a super hardcore right protest or something like that, having them next to each other. I do you have any thoughts on that?
So there's definitely social, like I said, social. If I was going to say one thing, in my personal opinion, I'd say social media is much more inherently bad at this point than good. You can kind of figure out, it's very interesting to see when some political issue or some social issue occurs and when stuff starts to trend, specifically on Twitter, because usually it's like, why am I waking up at 7 a.m. and this potential controversy, and I'll put in air quotes controversy, has 5 million tweets, where people in the United States up at 4 in the morning, 3 to 1 in the morning, just absolutely going to town on this. And then you can kind of figure out what time it is in other countries and say, maybe it happened here, maybe it happened here. But the use of fake accounts online is a very dangerous thing. And I'm still personally very shocked that companies haven't found a way to hide it. The only real guess is that they profit off of that. Maybe there's a profit margin off of how many users they have.
Yeah, I wonder if the information they get from those like fake accounts would be valuable to advertisers or the people buying the data. Because if it's like,
I'd say it'd be interesting to see how it's responded to. The account itself might not be valuable, but what about the replies underneath? How do people react to a certain area? And again, that's collecting data from other people, kind of getting goaded into it by potential bots.
Oh, so you're saying the data that could be valuable there is in the people's reactions to get like the likes and dislikes of like a region, or
potentially that's one way if they're able to sift through that data.
Yeah, how cool. I'm in a, I don't have anything, I don't know what to say now, but I'm in a it's called cyborg anthropology class right now. And this week it's a new topic every week. This week we're on algorithms. And so we were talking about just like how algorithms are kind of like influencing our lives. And it was, I don't know, the conversations are so cool because it's college kids all hooked on social media, but also like Georgetown kids that are like super smart, like understand like some of the consequences of it, but kind of like still are doing it. So it's just like, it's fascinating the different perspectives we're hearing about. And one of the, I mean, this is now we're getting totally wild, but we're in deep enough, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
I was having a conversation with the professor at the end of the class, and I was like, I brought up this idea of bundle theory in philosophy, like that really like our like identity isn't so much like a single identity, more of it's just like a giant like bundle of different like mental states, desires, likes, dislikes, emotions, all the different things, instead of like a big like unified ego. Because I mean, you can like kind of tell this in yourself, like you have desires pulling you in opposite directions. So it's like it would be difficult to make the case that you're a single unified whole thing pointing in one direction. So kind of going off that, I was like, all right, like if we could somehow figure out a way to like map those all out, could we, I mean, that brings in like the transhumanism debate. Like, could we potentially like program ourselves onto a computer, or build like a model of the brain? I mean, this is like a very materialist perspective, but I mean, I guess as a 19-year-old kid, that's kind of where I am right now. Maybe I'll go panpsychist a little bit later on in life, but for right now, that seems like somewhat plausible, at least to me.
Yes. So if you've ever seen Westworld, it's a TV show on HBO right now, that actually delves really great into what the human mind can become. There are things in deep learning that map similar to a brain. We have convolutional neural networks, which in theory are supposed to map themselves with neurons that fire at certain times like a brain. it's going to be really interesting to see how AI is going to work going towards that, because I think, can you create a human with the internet? I don't work in AI. It terrifies me a little too much, but it's interesting to see like a comparison between like IBM's Watson, which is straight up just this ultimate knowledge computer, but it doesn't have a personality. All it can do is be asked a question and it'll give you an answer. It can't think on itself. It just has all this information, but can they ever bridge that to think?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. Robots, I think, will be the most interesting question with that, is can you create a human robot? Can you create a robot that thinks and does exactly like a human does? I have no clue. And that's one of those things in tech that I hope we never have an answer to, because then we'll end up getting some Terminator level action going, or Westworld, where you have a world that's completely cyborged, but they do have a will in a sense to think towards like their programming. But who knows?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if we're going deep on this, I guess like in talking about like artificial general intelligence, I got a YouTube ad that was like, the year's 2045, we've created artificial general intelligence. No one knows. Like anyone that claims like AGI is a certain like number of decades or years away is, I mean, I think totally talking out their ass. That we just don't know yet. But I guess like in the like the problem with artificial general intelligence taking on like a super dystopian anti-human sentiment is that I think that like if we're the ones programming them, unless they're able to reprogram themselves, which we would I would hope have the foresight to like block against, then we could just program them not to want to get rid of us because they see that we're doing things inefficiently or that we're a total waste of space.
But then that is taking away what the human aspect of it would be. So in that sense, if you go for the free thinking robot, you can't program it to do that. Again, I'm completely fine with that, but I think the best one, like you said, like if today, if we actually have a type of AI that is able to beat the Turing test. Mm-hmm. So the Turing test is what determines computer versus AI, or computer versus human. If there was some sort of AI that would be able to do that, it would be smart enough to not solve the test. It's a very creepy, crazy rabbit hole.
Okay.
It's this crazy rabbit hole to jump down, because it's like, we're probably not there yet. You need a lot of stuff. I hope we're not there yet, is I think the better thing. But seeing how a human brain works, can we make that into a tech thing? Maybe. Mm-hmm. I think we'll see is the best answer.
Yeah, I think it is too. I just find it fucking fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, from an aspect of like nerdness, yeah, it's interesting. It's really cool. From a science side, from a technology side, no, it's absolutely terrifying to me. That's the same thing. I had a tweet about it the other day about deepfake technology. Sure, in media and in that sort of stuff, it looks absolutely cool. It's so amazing. In real life, it's not as interesting and cool. It's a lot more terrifying based on what it can be used for.
Yeah, the applications seem like overwhelmingly negative, I would say, for deepfake, just like even off the top of your head.
Well, a deepfake, yeah, I mean, I can rattle off a million things that's wrong with deepfakes.
Yeah.
But you can literally put someone somewhere that they don't actually exist. You can make incriminating evidence against someone that could lead to them going to jail. You could do something, I mean, a very common one in deepfake technology is revenge porn. I'm not going to go obviously too deep into that one, but people will literally make fake sex tapes for people and publish them. And it can technically ruin someone's life by, or at least ruining their, how they're viewed socially by someone. So that's, and especially with how it's getting almost to the point where it's hard to tell it's fake. And that's when it's already hard to tell it's fake. It's getting even worse in that sense.
Yeah, the hard to tell it's fake. One of the things I did a project senior year on GTP3, and one of its like capabilities was being able to like write text, or I mean, it could do a ton of different things. It was a natural language processing beast, because it had been trained on like basically like the entire corpus of the internet. So I mean, it had all that data and all those patterns to analyze, which is so cool to think about on its own. But it was able to write text. So like it would write a block of text or a page, and then a human would write a block of text, a page, and then they would bring in a focus group, and they would ask the focus group like which text was written by a computer, which one was written by a human, and they would guess, and it was split 50-50. They completely were guessing. They had no idea. It was completely indistinguishable from human text.
Yeah, again, that's one of those creepy things. But also, then you have to look into who was writing it.
Mm-hmm.
How was their writing comprehension?
It's just a dummy.
Because I've seen some of those. Like we had an AI watch X amount of videos and had it write a script, and you read them, and you're like, "What am I reading right now?" But yeah, the technology is getting very automated, for better or worse.
Mm-hmm. Do you? I know we're obviously getting off topic, but like on automation, do you think about job displacement at all, or about like one of the things we were talking about last class, or that I had written, like a question. We have these weekly questions and readings that we have to do, and mine was like with increased automation, with increased technological capabilities, like what is going to be left like solely on the domain of humans, like what are we able to do that the computers or like a super deep neural net combined with a body like wouldn't be able to do? Because like physical acts, like the shit out of Boston Dynamics is insane. Like any specialized task. I mean, they crushed us at Go, chess, like poker. I think in somewhat recently, like 2019, like just all these things. It's like they're like the roots are growing, and I mean, like the domain that they're able to like perform over is insane.
Yeah, the performance is getting very interesting. There are certain things. I mean, coding is probably one thing that will take a long time to actually become automated, because even if they do have a robot writing code, a human still has to check it in case there's error or anything like that. That's the thing, is what will start to cause people to be replaced by robots. I mean, we saw it happen with factory line. Amazon has certain stuff that can kind of have a fully automated, like, oh, your package is here, we're moving it across the warehouse to here. Yeah, automation gets into a really interesting thing where it's the biggest issue in automation is the human programming it, because if there's a mistake, it's probably either due to a malfunction or a code error, which means that was a human mistake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
a little weird.
Which part is weird? The fact that it was a human mistake?
All of it gets to be weird, because it's very interesting to see an automated thing. If it malfunctions, it was probably human error, because say something broke inside it, it probably wasn't created right by a human. It wasn't wired right, and it just always back to that human error issue.
That's why I was confused when you were talking about like the human would still have to go back and recheck the code's code.
Because it's checking for you have to have someone recheck for the error.
But so at its base, if the computer makes an error in writing code, does it stem from a human error in initially creating the code that's writing the code?
Probably.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That would probably be the issue.
How cool is that?
That's still that's not as common today.
Yeah, and I guess we
could
also
things that can do that.
There are things that can do that?
I think it's still in early stages of creation.
Yeah. I would like to preface this entire conversation with we're nowhere near, or I don't think we're anywhere near general intelligence. The GTP3 can't think it doesn't really understand what it's doing. And I mean consciousness is a whole other issue, because I mean we really don't understand that. Like, could a deep enough neural net somehow give rise to like a self-reflective thing? A consciousness is what it feels like for information to be processed. But then, like, why would an algorithm like processing a whole bunch of information be conscious? So I don't know if we're missing, like, if we're ever going to be able to build consciousness, or if we're missing some necessary spark, or maybe that's like a superhuman viewpoint. That like maybe it. I mean, these are fucking unanswerable, super hard questions. So jump in whenever you want.
They're the questions that'll either never be answered, hopefully never in our lifetime, or will just accidentally happen. That's I think the only contribution to that era of consciousness, because that's the whole thing. What is consciousness? I'm not a philosopher, so I don't really have like the long-winded like view of what it is. So when it comes to tech, I hope I never have to personally see it.
What do you mean by accident?
I think something could just happen accidentally. Someone might stumble upon it. That could also be something, someone programs something and keeps doing it until they might accidentally discover it. But that's how a lot of things happen. Something might be, well, like an apple falling on your head. It just could technically, like, you're thinking about it and you just try something different and it might work.
Mm-hmm. Or even like evolution, like variation is the reason, like, why we keep getting better, why we keep evolving, because we're like trying so many different things, and like one thing that we kind of just like threw out as like a guess like ended up working. But like,
yeah, that's what might happen. It might just be, oh, maybe this, maybe not.
Maybe not. Yeah, maybe, I mean, maybe not. That's a good sentiment to have, I feel like, because you can get super bogged down in thinking about all this stuff when really, like, we're just not in a place. Like, I'm in a tricky position, I guess, for myself, because I like love thinking about it, like, am looking for answers in to a lot of these questions, but it's just like I feel like a lot of the answers just aren't even there.
Well, that's actually a fun way to cycle back to PhD and like research and all these things, where if you're in academia, if you're working towards research, yes, like you're raised through at least the US education system, where everything that is asked has an answer. Every question has an answer to it. And I mean, personally, it took me a long time to kind of realize, like, in research, you're not trying to answer a question that's already been answered. You're trying to solve something that doesn't have the exact answer yet. And that can lead to failure. That can lead to these things that it might suck. You might spend months at a time working on something that doesn't actually work. But the thing is, I think like in this scenario, PhD is taught. You might have this question that you ask that you don't think will not even work. And you spend this time working on it and you finally come to the answer. And I think that's something that has helped a lot. And I think I finally see a lot better from the researcher standpoint, where keep asking questions, and that, like, always ask the questions. If you have the means to answer them, try to, but you might not. Failure is actually a very important thing. You can fail a million times, but the one thing that you do might be exactly what you need.
I don't want to use like not mature, but something like that, in trying, like, in having a desire to like almost only want to try to answer unanswerable questions. And so I feel like sometimes, like, naive, or like what, like,
keep asking, keep reading, keep learning, but you might not always get the answer, and that is okay.
Kind of lie in like breaking them down into like 10,000ths of pieces. So, but it's like, it's hard. Say I'm trying to answer like 10 really hard questions. Then it's 10,000, then it's 100,000 different questions we're trying to tackle at once. And I mean, they all have their, and maybe even some of those are unanswerable. So it's.
But that's fine. I think I'll use a broad example. Like we're in current research we're working on, we have this answer. We know the answer works, but then we start to run these tests on it. We know the answer works, but then we accidentally run something and get 4 more answers. And then from those, you get 5 more answers, and you just keep getting these things. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, I have all this information, all of it's important, but how do we prioritize this? How do we get to it? And that's the thing where like, you might start just going down, you might have 20,000 impossible questions, and you start working on one of them, and one of them just starts dominoing to all these other questions. And some of them that might be new questions that you didn't even know you wanted answered, and you find out that they're answered. And that's the interesting thing. That's the whole thing of like, just the thought process of the research of thinking. You might go ask a question, you might think it's this answer, and it's this other answer 180 degrees in the opposite direction that leads you to all these other answers.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
It gets interesting.
It's totally interesting. It's just, I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's like it's like at least my like natural state. I mean, I don't want to speak for all of humanity, but I mean, I think you can reasonably well, like just this like intrinsic motivation to like try to understand yourself, try to understand the world. I mean, maybe from like a super like instinctual us hanging out on the plains of fighting for survival against lions in the freezing wilderness, just barely inventing fire, trying to like map the territory around us and get provide some type of barrier around us, because I feel like that's what, like, in trying to understand yourself and the world around us, you're kind of like, or we're trying to kind of like expand the domain of like known territory. And I think like, because that kind of gives us some kind of comfort, or it gives us some type of increased ability. Like if we know the room we're in, I think we sleep much more soundly at night. But it's like, it's almost like it's an infinite room, and then just like infinitely many doors leading off into different directions.
And that's a interesting thing. Like I am 25. I'm one of the first generations to kind of go into my middle school experience with the internet. You were kind of the generation right after where you had the internet through your entire life. Mm-hmm. You had like it's a 6-year age difference, but there's this just in those 6 years, how much we went from having to turn dial-up internet on. So we literally had to disconnect the phone to get onto the internet to the internet's everywhere, which we went from my years where, yeah, in middle school, I had the internet, I could do all these things with it, compared to your years where even in kindergarten, if you had access to the internet, you could ask any question to Google. You could ask these questions and you were always getting answers. Mm-hmm. And that's probably why the Gen Z group is a lot more curious. They're so much more, they've had the access to this information for so much longer. 6 years still is significantly much more in terms of literally growing up with it. Is a very interesting way to look at it, because even though it's only 6 years, I only started kind of actively using the internet in 6th grade, where middle or younger kids were literally first day of school might have been using it. Mm-hmm.
And 6th grade's below me. My younger brother, even like grades below him, are like really like, I grew up with technology, but those guys are really growing up with technology. Like the phone addiction is starting like ridiculously early. And I mean, that's a parenting question, I guess, but I mean,
yes, I do not blame the internet for. I think do not be. My personal advice is do not be an iPad parent.
An iPad parent.
Just because it exists does not mean your child needs to use it.
Yeah.
That's a different area altogether, though.
Yeah, that's a 25-year-old and a 19-year-old giving parenting advice. Yeah. Fucking awesome, dude. That was a lot of fun.
Oh, it was a great time.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. It was a great time.
Awesome. Well, I hope we stay in touch, and good luck with all your secret projects you're working on.
You as well.
Like these neural networks are modeled based on what's going on inside of us. Like they're modeled after the workings of our own brain. And I just find that absolutely amazing. Like that it works, first of all, and just how well they work. That they're able to beat chess grand champions, like that they're able to beat us at our own game, like the amount of information they're able to process, the patterns they're able to deduce from these gigantic data sets is just unbelievable to me, let alone the fact that we're creating something in our own likeness. And I'm not particularly religious, but I mean, it harkens back to God making human beings in his own likeness. Like, but in this situation, we're God. So it's like there's so many implications, I think, that are just underrepresented and don't get talked about enough. The fact that we're creating these new systems that are capable of, I mean, just unbelievable things just from the applications so far. I mean, who knows? I mean, a lot of it is, there's obviously a lot of hype that comes with any new technology. It's going to promise there's going to be artificial general intelligence in 10 years. No one knows that. I mean, you can't make claims like that. But I mean, like being able to summarize, I don't know if you saw GPT-3, being able to summarize complex legal documents, being able to write text that is indistinguishable from that of humans. It's unbelievable what these programs are able to do right now. And I'd find it fascinating. I want to learn more. So please enlighten me, share as much as you can. Tell me about how we're using deep learning for cybersecurity. Give me your history, your thoughts on technology. I want to hear it all.